Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you are in the world. Welcome to the second Drupal chat. This week I'm going to be talking about the Drupal learning curve. I've been using Drupal to build websites for clients since 2010, and you can find me on Drupal.org. At the link I just gave you here. I am Vegan Triathlete. The replay of this chat will be available on the teachyourselfdrupal.org website, and I've placed the link in the chat stream for your convenience as well. The replay will contain session notes, and there's the links to various URLs that I've checked out in preparing for this. So you can check out those things at the link I've provided for you down there. If you want to take part in the chat, you can feel free to take a seat. Just make sure you're using Chrome, because right now, Blab works best with Chrome, better than it does with other browsers. So I'll get things started here. As I said, I've been using Drupal since 2010 to build websites for clients. I had actually used it for my own personal site since I had put one up in 2009. And so I've had the opportunity myself to experience the Drupal learning curve. So one thing that I think I'd like to address first is the idea of whether there really is this unusual learning curve for Drupal, especially when you compare it to the process of learning any new tool. Now, certainly there's a joke in the Drupal community about the Drupal learning cliff, and the graph that you see for that actually is a little bit confusing, because the way they set things up, they've actually got time on the x-axis and your skill level on the y-axis. And so if you actually read the graph properly, that's a good thing when things are steep, because that means that you're not spending a lot of time and you're picking up a lot of skills. So if you really wanted to convey a picture of things being hard, you would actually want time to be on the y-axis and your skills to be on the x-axis, which would indicate that you're picking up very little skills and spending a whole lot of time studying things. Now, I can tell you that when I first started working with Drupal, the way that I approached this was that I said, this is free open source software, and I've got access to the software to use it. I've got access to the documentation on Drupal.org, and I can look on YouTube, and I can look all over the internet to find things. And so I spent, I would say, to the best of my recollection, about 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, for about 6 months, figuring out how to use Drupal. And I'll talk about that a little bit more to explain why things worked out that way, because I'll give you the TLDR of that right now, is that it really wasn't necessary for me to spend that much time to get up to speed. It was just stubbornness and foolishness on my part to go about doing things that way. And part of which was just the attitude of that I can get all this stuff for free. And honestly, it would have been a smart choice for me to have at least considered looking for a Drupal book that I could have purchased that would have helped me to start getting my mind around, what is this thing called Drupal and how do you go about using it? And I think that's something common that you will hear people say when they will give the counter argument that there isn't this huge learning curve with Drupal, that all it really takes is for you to have a little bit of guidance for somebody to point you in the right direction and to start getting your head around things, to start, and you'll understand how to do things better once you've been given that bit of guidance. So, WordPress has their marketing that they've done, whether, through proxy or through, direct efforts on their part, this whole idea of the famous 5-minute WordPress install. And the truth of the matter is that installing Drupal is really no more difficult than installing WordPress. It's the same exact things that you need to do. You've got a code base that you need to install. You've got a database that you need to set up. And then you run an install process, and then things are pretty much good to go. There might be a couple of steps that you have to do with Drupal, like with your sites all files and maybe setting some permissions, but it's nothing out of the ordinary and nothing that's so difficult. So this idea of WordPress being so much more easy than Drupal, I think really is more a matter of marketing than reality. And I don't mean to say anything bad about WordPress either. This is more so that as easy as you may find WordPress, you can find Drupal as well. The biggest difference probably is that Drupal out of the box doesn't look the way that WordPress looks out of the box. And that's where some of the people maybe get a little bit uptight about using Drupal, because they don't really know what to do with it once it's installed. But you have to keep in mind that WordPress is tailored to be a blogging platform, and it really is like first in class blogging platform. It's a great blog. It's a wonderful tool for somebody to create a personal blog, and it's been optimized for that. It's been tailored to do that. And so it's not really fair to compare WordPress to Drupal and how fast you are able to use it and how good it looks, because WordPress has been built with a different idea in mind. And so that's one of the first things that I think I'll start addressing now with the learning curve, is understanding the idea behind Drupal. Drupal is more of an abstracted approach to building websites. It's meant to be more of a framework than just strictly a content management system, and it's highly modular. And then on top of that, you've got the Drupalisms that you need to understand. And the truth of the matter is that many of those Drupalisms, they're just words. They're really just vocabulary. And the vocabulary itself may seem really, scientific. It may seem really like academic and kind of like you'd have to be super smart to be able to do things, but it's really not as bad as it may seem. So, things that throw many people off when they see Drupal in the first place is this whole talk about nodes. And with Drupal 7 and the idea of entities and bundles, entity types and bundles and entities themselves, that doesn't necessarily make things better, because now we just have more technical words that we're using. But we're moving away some from the idea of talking about nodes. But still, there's this overall idea of the way that you start to create things on a Drupal site. And this vocabulary that we have is meant to capture some of these more abstract ideas. So, one of the things that really helps you start to make progress is to be able to kind of push your way through these Drupalisms. And there is a glossary on Drupal.org where you can look up some of these terms that we use in the Drupal world that can help you with parts of the vocabulary that we use and what it is that we mean by those parts. So I'll go back now, instead of talking, since I'm talking more in abstract sense here, kind of the way that Drupal does things, let me get to some specifics about my experience when I was first learning Drupal. So for me, I hadn't planned to be a web developer. I certainly hadn't planned to be, building websites for other people and becoming a code monkey and knowing all of this stuff about the inner workings of Drupal and writing custom modules and understanding web servers and Apache and stuff like that. I just had a site that I wanted to build for myself, for the idea of seeing about maybe I want to be a life coach. And I had started out using free webs because when I was looking to do this, I said, let me find some place that will host a website for me for free. I wasn't really committed to doing this. And so I hunted around, I found out about free webs, and I put my site up on free webs. And they had their own proprietary tool that they used for building a website. And so this was actually in 2008 that I created that website. And I created it pretty easily. And that's what I ran on from 2008 until 2009. And then in 2009, I realized there was some other things that I wanted to be able to do. And the way that free webs was set up didn't really give me the level of control that I needed. And I realized that I needed to be able to get a bit more access to the server itself. And so I needed to start searching around for ways that I would be able to get access to that. And I was actually quite surprised to find out once I started doing the research about shared hosting, because what I had done with free webs, initially though it started out as free, I did then decide, actually, I want to have a domain name, and I want to be able to use my custom domain name. And so to be able to do that on free webs, I had to upgrade to their, whatever they call it, their professional account or whatever. And that was like $99 a year, which to me seemed pretty cheap, actually. It's like, oh, that's pretty cool to spend $100 a year to have a website. That's not bad. But then in 2009, when I started searching around for other options for hosting my website, and I found out about shared hosting for $3 a month or $4 a month, whatever, I said, wow, like $36 or $48 a month compared to $100 is even way cheaper. And plus I get so much more power. And so I was pretty surprised about that and pretty excited about it as well, that like, wow, I was being so foolish using free webs. I thought I was getting such a great deal. And so what I needed to do then was I found some cheap shared hosting, and I started going through their installer scripts because I needed to be able to create my website now. And this shared hosting, I think, did have something, it was called like RV Website Builder or something like that. I think they had some of their own proprietary tool as well. But I just started using this installer script. They had Fantastico on the server. And so I just started installing some various things. And I think one of the first things that I installed actually was Joomla, because I think it just showed up higher in the script results there. And I got to tell you, trying to get my website set up on Joomla was totally not intuitive, and it was a nightmare for me trying to figure out how to even get my website to look like what I had already done with this proprietary interface before. And the thing that really put the nail in the coffin for me is that one of the things that I wanted to have, which I did have on my previous hosting, was a blog. And it didn't matter how much I banged my head and how much I searched around on the internet, I just couldn't find a way to get Joomla to create a blog for me. And so I ditched Joomla and I started making my way through some other scripts in Fantastico. And at that time, when I was doing this, I had no idea what a CMS was. I couldn't have told you that it stood for Content Management System. And even if I knew that it stood for Content Management System, that didn't really mean anything to me. And so I was making my way through this installer, just clicking various things to see what I was going to be able to use to get this website built. And I don't know that I had even looked at WordPress at that point. I don't know if I knew about WordPress or I knew enough and I thought, well, this is for blogs and I don't want just a blog, I want a website. So I didn't try installing WordPress, but I did eventually make my way through their list of options, and I saw this thing called Drupal. And I had talked with one of my acquaintances sometime before that, and he had mentioned a Drupal. And he had said one of the things he liked better about Drupal is that it wasn't quite as hierarchical as Joomla was. It didn't force you to do things in a certain way. And so I said, okay, well, I don't really know what this Drupal thing is, but I'm not having success with anything else, so I'm going to install Drupal. And so here's where this long story kind of winds down a little bit here, getting to the point. So I used the script installer, I installed Drupal, and this was Drupal 6. And one of the things that was nice about Drupal 6 is once you install Drupal, there was this welcome page that you got, and it told you the next steps to take. And it provided you links to enable, you can enable modules from this place, and then you can start adding functionality to your site. And so one of the things that I saw right away when I took that link to find out about adding functionality to the site was this thing that was called blog. And so there was this checkbox there that I could just check, and then voila, right away, I had a blog running on my site. Just like that. I mean, no problems. And I understand, that people will rip on Drupal's blog a lot. It's not really the highest powered blog, but for my intents and purposes, it was perfect, and I was thrilled. And so my initial experience with Drupal was so easy because like within minutes of having installed Drupal, I got a solution to a problem that I had already spent days Googling around, trying to figure out how to do with no success. And I just eventually ditched Joomla on account of that. And here with Drupal, I really, literally within like 45 minutes to an hour of when I installed Drupal, I had completely recreated the website that I already had previously through this proprietary website builder, and my website was up and running. And as far as I was concerned, the Garland theme was a perfectly lovely theme for me to use. I ran with that theme for, I think, probably a year before I even bothered looking for contributed themes. And so for me, this whole idea that when people say Drupal is so hard, it's not intuitive at all, it's kind of funny to me because I knew nothing about web development. I knew nothing about content management systems. And when I happened to stumble across Drupal, I got my site up and running within 45 minutes to an hour. And I loved it from the beginning. And I'm telling you, I didn't come from any type of web development background. Everything I've learned about web development, I've learned from Drupal. And so my personal opinion is that, actually Drupal can be quite easy to use. So now let's get back to when I was talking about the fact that, okay, if it was so easy to use, then why did I end up spending 6 months, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day studying it? That's when I decided that I actually wanted to learn to use it as a web development tool, and I was going to become a back-end person. And the biggest issue that I would say I ran into is that I was looking to understand everything from first principles. And so when I was reading the documentation on Drupal.org, as I'm sure many of you are aware, as you read any web page on the internet, they tend to link to other web pages. And so what I would do is I would start reading a page, and I'd find that there was a link on the page in the documentation. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I need to make sure that I understand what this page is saying before I finish the first page that I was reading. So I'd go to that next page. And then, of course, you know what happens. I'm reading that page, and there's a link on that page. And so I got myself into this kind of endless recursion of opening up another page and another page and another page, thinking that I should make sure I understand this page before I complete the rest of the page. And so that was a big part of my problem, was this idea of trying to make sure that I had read all of the links and I was going to understand everything down to the level of a page where there was no links on that page. And so I was spinning my own wheels on account of the approach that I was taking. Not so much that it was anything that was wrong with Drupal or wrong with the documentation. And another thing that I've mentioned already as well is that I didn't bother to even go to the library and look to see if there was a book on Drupal that could kind of point me in the right direction. So one of the things that I did do, though, is I got online, I looked on Meetup to see if there were any groups that discussed Drupal. At that point, even though I had an account on Drupal.org, I didn't know about groups.drupal.org. And so I didn't know about they called them debug groups. And at the time that I was doing it, I think there was, I'm not sure how many groups there were here in Colorado. There were at least a couple. At this point, there are many groups in Colorado alone where you can learn about Drupal. But through Meetup, I found out about these debug meetings that I could go to. And that's where I really started to get an idea of how things came together. And so I'd like to continue with a little bit of more of a story about my learning curve, because I'm the only one here talking and you guys haven't asked me any questions. So I get to talk about whatever I want to talk about. And so, as I had started to dig into Drupal, I did make some of the typical newbie mistakes, like enabling the PHP filter and writing PHP code inside of node bodies to get functionality to happen. And that's how I started putting some pieces together. But I progressed beyond that and realized that, well, I really should probably I need to learn how to write a custom module. And I did start looking at some of the contributed modules and to get an idea of how to put some of those things together. And one of the modules that I looked at was pretty much a module that created a block on your site. And so I looked at that module. I kind of had an idea of what it was doing, and I decided I was going to make a module that was even better than that one because I was going to add more flexibility to this block. But it was still going to be this block that was going to display some stuff on your site. And I came up with this idea of how I could make this block that was going to function in a more clever way. And the first use case that I was thinking about was to put testimonials on the site. And so I was getting really excited about this great way that I was going to extend what this module maintainer had written to make it more generic and more customizable. And I went to one of these Drupal meetings and I told them about this great idea that I had for a module that I was going to create. And I described it to them about how I was going to show testimonials. And the people at the meeting looked at me and said, oh, okay, well, I think you could do that with views. And I had no idea what they were talking about because I hadn't dug into views. I wasn't even aware that views existed. And so I was thrown back and I said, what's views? And so the person who was running that meeting, just right like that, said, okay, well, here, look, I've got views installed on this site. Let me show you how you would do it. And it took him maybe 5 minutes, let's say, to put together the exact functionality that I was describing doing with the testimonials. And that was just, this one-off example that he showed us stuff that you can do with views. So I was really blown away at that point because I thought, okay, here I thought I was so clever. I was going to be the next big thing in the Drupal community because of this idea that I came up with for a block that was going to show different stuff in it. And now somebody demonstrated to me here this views module that does all sorts of things way beyond what I'd even considered doing. And so that gave me something to start digging into and learning more specifically. Say, okay, let me learn something about this views module. I made progress with that. And then I wanted to get some more ideas of how to start doing some more custom things on the site. I had been continuing to go to the different Drupal meetups. And at another meetup, because I would go with a list of questions every week. I'd be playing with stuff during the week. I'd go to the meetup. I'd have this whole list of questions that I wanted to ask. And so at one of the meetups, I don't even know what type of question I was asking, but people talked about the form API. And I had no idea what the form API was. And of course, I was puzzled. And I asked them, like, what's the form API? And Matt Cleve happened to be at that meetup. That's Vordude is his handle on Drupal.org. And he told me about a YouTube video that he had created that introduced people to using the form API. And so I went to his YouTube video and I watched it. And that's where the light bulb really went off for me. That's where I really started to get the idea of how Drupal works and how it does the things that it does. Because what you're doing with the form API, one of the things that he demonstrated, I think he showed using some of Drupal's hooks to use like hook form alter. But if that wasn't in his video, it was something that I ended up stumbling across soon after that. And so this is one of the things that I would give as recommendation for people who are going through the Drupal learning curve is not so much that you need to learn the form API, but that you want to get around some people who know Drupal and are doing Drupal so you can ask your questions. And then the other thing you want to do is not try to focus on getting to first principles on everything. Don't worry if you understand everything. What you really want to do is just find something that you can grab onto and you can start playing with. And so one of the things that's nice about this is that this certainly opens things up for people who are not looking to be code monkeys, who are not looking to be the back-end developers. This opens things up for people who are looking to be site builders. This is opening things up for people who may be looking to be themers. It's opening things up for people who are looking to be code monkeys as well. The key piece is just grab a hold of something and start using it. Because once you start using pieces of Drupal, that's where you really start to get a sense of how it is that Drupal works. And that's where you start learning about, oh, now that I know how to do this, I want to explore something else. And you'll gradually make your way through your paces to get to those pieces of information that are going to be really important to you. It's not really important where you start. It's important that you just do start, and you start digging in, and you start using Drupal to build things. And that was one of the things that really helped me to turn the corner in my acquisition of skills on Drupal, was get away from all the theoretical and all of the abstract and trying to understand everything from the first principles and read a whole bunch of documentation to figure out what I was going to do, and actually just dig in and start doing some things. So a recommendation that I would make to people who are trying to pick that first thing that they want to do is, what is it that you'd like to accomplish? If you're going to be a themer, then I would say a good thing for you to start with is your first thing is find some contributed themes and install a contributed theme and play with the theme and see how you can configure the theme. And you're going to start getting an idea for some of the things that happen in the theme layer. And then you can start digging into the code for that theme. Find a theme that is one that is somewhat appealing to you, that you're going to enjoy working with, you're going to enjoy configuring, you kind of like the stuff that it's doing on the site. Because then when you start exploring it, you start looking at the code, you're going to be learning about things that you're actually interested in being able to do in the theme layer. Okay, let's say that you're not looking to be a themer. Let's say that you're looking to be a site builder, an integrator. And so where might you get started with things? Well, I'd say it's very easy for you to just get started with the modules that come with core. So just start enabling some of the modules that come with core and play with them. See what they do. See how they change things on your site. And then you even get a chance to see how some of the modules actually interact with each other. And it'll start to help you get your mind around the way that Drupal has this modular approach. And it also has a way that somehow or another, modules are able to communicate with each other and play off the things that those modules provide. So start out with core and just start enabling modules and read their help text and just start poking around, doing stuff with them on the site. Your next step would be to now let me find some contributed modules to install. Well, Views is part of Drupal core now with Drupal 8. So those are one of the modules that you would be able to stumble across just by enabling things in through your core modules and playing with it. But for the next step that you can take, if you go to Drupal.org, you can actually do a search to find out what are the most installed contributed modules, as well as find out what are the most installed themes. So when you find out what is, and Views is still up there as the most contributed, most used contributed module, and I imagine it's going to be for quite some time because it really has quite a number of users. So, and still a lot of people are using Drupal 7. But make your way down the list and see what some of the other modules are that are the most used modules and install it. And then do the same thing. Play around with that module that you just installed. And over time, you will start getting that curiosity about like, okay, now that I've installed this module, I see that when I go into Views, Views does something a little bit differently. Or you'll find some connection like that. And so putting these pieces together in conjunction with going to meetups and or Drupal camps or Drupal conference. Drupal conference obviously is more expensive, but the good news is that with the Drupal conferences, they record all the sessions and they make them available on YouTube, so you can even be participating virtually in the sessions once the replays are available. So as you're playing around with the themes, or you're playing around with the contributed modules, and then you are doing things to meet with people either virtually or in real life, and be able to start asking some questions about the things they're doing, some of the pieces are going to start coming together for you. So now let me talk about, let's say that you do want to be a code monkey and you want to be able to start getting your head around things. You're going to follow a similar approach, is that find something. Drupal used to include the poll module. They no longer include it in Drupal 8, but the idea behind the poll module was that it was an example module to show you how to build a module for Drupal. They still include the blog module, and the blog module is pretty easy to digest. Whether it's a great blog tool or not, it's quite easy to digest. When you enable it, you get a pretty good sense of what you do on your site to make use of that. And so you can play around with that, and then you can look at the code in the blog module to see how the blog module is exposing those things and making those things available. And this is a way that you start to understand, how do you build modules properly in Drupal. Views is probably not the world's greatest contributed module to begin studying to learn how to be a module developer, because Views is pretty outrageously humongous. And, probably something also like rules would be a bit over your head to get into. But beyond looking at blog, maybe you would look at a module along the lines of something like Path Auto. It's a relatively small module, and it provides some pretty understandable functionality on a site when you enable it. And so this is a way that you can go about building up your coding chops. So let's see. The next thing that I think you're going to want to start working on to get good at Drupal and build up your skill set is getting more of a concept of the Drupal way. And there's actually the good side and the bad side of the Drupal way. So prior to Drupal 8, pretty much everything that Drupal did was written specifically by the Drupal community. And Drupal had kind of an attitude and a reputation of that, like, we're smarter than everybody else, and we know how to do things better than everybody else. And so we're going to look at what other people have done, and then we're going to rewrite it the Drupal way. And so this is kind of the downside of this concept of the Drupal way. That's changed a lot now with Drupal 8, with the adoption of Symfony 2 and having more of an attitude of proudly invented elsewhere, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to rewrite everything and make it do it the way that Drupal does it. We're bringing Drupal more into, modern web development best practices and tapping into these other components and tools and frameworks and approaches for building websites. So there should be less of that issue of the downside of the Drupal way. The upside of the Drupal way is being able to understand this idea of things like extensibility and the modularity and just the ability to customize things on your site without having to hack into any of the existing code base. That the Drupal way is that modules provide hooks or alters. They provide mechanisms for tapping into the flow of those modules so that you can make the customizations that you'd like to make on the site. So this is a big thing to understand, and it's an area where many people get tripped up when they first start using Drupal, particularly people who come from a PHP programming background, because what they want to do is they know how to do things in PHP. And so right away, they're going to go dig into the code and they're going to start hacking around in the code. Or they're going to do something like I did, where they would enable the PHP filter, which doesn't even, that's not even an option anymore in Drupal 8. That's been killed off officially, fortunately, because the PHP filter is a dangerous thing that you really never want to use on a site. But they'll enable the PHP filter and they'll start dropping PHP code into node bodies to get things to happen on the site. And you're really shooting yourself in the foot when you go about doing things that way, because you're circumventing Drupal. And I've worked on projects, production, like live sites, where people who clearly had no clue about how Drupal provided a framework for you and provided a lot of functionality and ways to tap into that functionality had built the site, because I saw things that they did where they were hacking into code and they were writing, this exceptional amount of code to do things that Drupal would already do for them if they would just take the time to learn that Drupal does that. And it was pretty unbelievable for me many times as well, that I really was baffled by how somebody could have gone to such great lengths to figure out how to completely circumvent Drupal and butcher Drupal to get it to do certain things, but it totally missed the point in the process of butchering it that way. Like, oh my gosh, look, Drupal already does this kind of stuff. So, so recognizing that Drupal is built with a philosophy to be extended and to be customized, and that if you're having to go through great lengths to do something, then you're probably doing something wrong, because there's probably a much easier way that you can accomplish that very thing that you want to accomplish just using the tools that Drupal provides. So helpful sites are like api.drupal.org. And again, I'm going to go back to, if you look at existing modules that are out there and see how they're doing things, that'll also point you to some of the things that you can use. So for example, when modules are written properly and they've got the proper doc block at the top, they'll have comments that say things like implements, hook, form, alter. And this gives you a little bit of a clue, like, oh, maybe I should Google on hook, form, alter. And then sure enough, when you do that, you'd come up to api.drupal.org, and you would have the opportunity to start learning about form alters and other types of alters that you can do. So let me see. Wrapping up this thought of one of the things that can make Drupal challenging for people is that many people will come to Drupal with some things that they need to unlearn before they actually start using Drupal. And once they can unlearn those things, they'll find that learning Drupal becomes so much easier, because they aren't trying to bash together two things that don't really work too well together. One point that I'd like to maybe dig into further right now for people who are watching this with the idea of helping to improve their skill set with Drupal and help them overcome the learning curve, is understanding what now in Drupal 7, we had moved towards this idea of entity types and entities. And it's been even further extended in Drupal 8, because now it's been extended to blocks. It's been extended to comments as well. But one of the really powerful features that Drupal has, and it's had it since, I don't remember if CCK was introduced in Drupal 5, I know it was in Drupal 6, is this idea of being able to attach fields to things. And in Drupal 6, those things that you could attach fields to was limited to what we called nodes or content types. In Drupal 7, it was extended. We came up, instead of the idea of just nodes in the content types, we came up with the idea, as though I'm the one who came up with it. I wasn't any part of this. I'm just the beneficiary of it. The Drupal community came up with the idea of entities and fieldable entities. And as I mentioned, this idea of what is fieldable and what constitutes an entity that you're able to manipulate through the user interface has even been extended further. And this is something that is a real strength with Drupal. And one of my clients that I'm working with right now is just getting to see just how powerful that is, because as he's laying out his data architecture and he wants to be able to do certain things on the site, I can so easily implement that for him on account of the fact, and I'm doing the site on Drupal 7 for him right now. So he's seeing it in terms of things that he wants to be able to do with users on the site. And the user entity type is a fieldable entity. And so what we needed to do previously in Drupal 6, for instance, there were different approaches that people took, like the profile, the user profile module. I'm forgetting if it was called profile or user profile. It's been a long time since I've been in Drupal 6. We needed to try to turn a user profile into a node type so that we could put fields via CCK into the node type. Well, with Drupal 7 now, the user entities are fieldable entities. And so when people want to be able to do things to fill out what a user profile looks like, we can just add fields to that. And so we can make the user profile very powerful. And then additionally, through the management of those fields with the user entities, we've got the option to say, does this appear on the registration page? And is this a required field? And so that idea of these fieldable entities applies to nodes at the content types, as it did before in Drupal 6 with CCK. And so we've still got all that same ability and more with doing things with nodes. But then even additionally, like with taxonomy becomes a fieldable entity on top of that. And so this concept is one that is very important for people to understand. And again, to compare it to WordPress, and I haven't looked at WordPress in a super duper long time. I don't know what they've added to it. But like one of the things that WordPress didn't have, at least, that Drupal does have, is this idea of being able to have the different content types, which has been extended to entities. You've got your different entities, you've got your different fieldable entities, so that you can actually build a powerful information architecture on your site, which gives you the ability to have some semantic value attached to these different data structures that you're creating on your site, which would be, in contrast to something like, let's say, if you've got a text area and now you're just going to dump all of this stuff inside a text area, and then there's really no way to parse it that well. With the fieldable entities, you would create different fields that hold specific information in each field. And so there's no need to try to parse it through some type of complicated algorithm, analyzing HTML tags that are wrapped around things, that that field itself is designed to hold certain information. So, so make sure that you're understanding this concept of entities and fieldable entities in Drupal, because it gives you a way that you can build a really powerful information architecture. Another key piece that's baked into Drupal is this idea of roles and permissions. Drupal is meant out of the box to be a multi-user type of a site. And so you've got this granularity of the user roles can be assigned to users, and you can make whatever user roles you want. And each role can be assigned certain permissions. And so you can grant people access to things on your site and make sure that they've got enough permission to do what they need to do, but it doesn't have to be thrown so wide open that they get access to other parts of the website and the interface that you really don't want them to get to. And so again, tying in with this idea of the granularity that you have with roles and permissions, just to come back to the idea that you've got the modularity, you've got the different contributed modules that you can plug into a site, which isn't unique to Drupal compared to WordPress, because WordPress has got its plugins as well. But what is different is this whole idea of the way that the hooks and the alters work so that the modules can play with each other. And so I think maybe what I'll say, we're getting close to an hour here. And with me just rambling on my own, I think it'd behoove me to tie things up sooner rather than later. So I think one of the things that I will then choose to wrap this up with here is the idea that there's a module for that. And Drupal has a very rich contributed module base. And before you try to do something custom on a Drupal site and run off and build it on your own, it's worthwhile to have a look at the contributed module base and see if there's a module that is already doing what you need it to do. And generally, you can have pretty good success finding these contributed modules just by using, your favorite search engine. So you could do something on Google, for instance, where you would use that site qualifier where you'd say site:drupal.org, and then put in whatever your query is. So if you wanted to know something about having people register with their email address instead of having to create a username, so you would say like site:drupal.org, register with email. And I would say surely you would come across the email registration contributed module. So always keep in mind that Drupal has this rich contributed module base that can help you to put a lot of functionality on your site to tailor Drupal to your whims. And so I think maybe what I'll do to really wrap this up here, so that I'm not only talking from the level of like site builders or code monkeys, is come back to the theme layer. And the theme layer has been updated in Drupal 8 to use Twig as opposed to using PHP templates. So that's something that should make more sense to people. But independent, whether it was Drupal 6, Drupal 7, Drupal 8, Drupal has got the concept of base themes and children themes and what you can inherit from base themes. And so when you go to Drupal.org and you look at the most installed themes, what you're going to see, I'm not sure if Zen is still on the top of the list, but what you're going to see is base themes tend to be the most used themes on Drupal. And so this again is a type of a framework that Drupal has to provide this extensibility that you need on your site for creating your own custom theme. You could certainly roll your own theme completely from scratch. I would say, though, that it's definitely worthwhile to have a look at base themes first and see about learning how to create a sub-theme off a base theme. And the truth of the matter is, the way that Drupal is written, you could use anything as a base theme. If you wanted to, for instance, in Drupal 7, use Bartik as a base theme, you could do that. There's a way that you specify your base theme in your themes.info file. This is kind of talking in Drupal 7 speak right now. I'm not going to, it's kind of hard to jump back and forth between 7 and 8 throughout this entire chat here. So I'll just continue talking with Drupal 7 speak right now. So in your modules .info file, you've got a way that you can specify the base theme that you're using. And you really could use any theme as the base theme. Again, as I said, you could even use Bartik as a base theme. And what that gives you then is the ability to override some things that the Bartik theme does so that your site will look the way that you want it to look without having to hack into the Bartik theme. So I hope this has given you a good overall idea of some of the philosophy behind Drupal and helps you maybe get your mind a little bit around the Drupal way and the abstracted nature of Drupal to help you move up your skill set more quickly. I hope that I've given you some good ideas for how you can utilize some other resources to help you get over, the learning curve as well. As I had mentioned earlier in the chat, the replay will be available on the teachyourselfdrupal.org website. I do have Discuss installed on that website as well. So if you had other comments or questions you wanted to make, you can feel free to go to the replay and place your questions and your thoughts there. So until next time, I will wish everybody adieu. And for next week, I am planning to discuss choosing contributed modules. So until next week, thanks for joining me, and I look forward to talking with you again on my next Drupal chat.